Hello and welcome to Political Geekery, a podcast about science, politics and the intersection of the two. I'm Sean.
And I'm Mark.
It's the 21st of the 5th, 2015. So we're a new show and I think we're still sort of finding our formula, really.
Our feet.
Yeah, as a very late episode. We'll try not to cock this one up. One of the things we can do this time, which is possibly a little bit different to the last two shows, earlier this week, I interviewed Sally, who volunteers with the Abortion Support Network, and we spoke about the situation with abortion in the Republic of Ireland and in Northern Ireland. So we've got an interview there with her coming up next. A bit of a warning, this interview touches on some very sensitive subjects, abortion itself, obviously, and also on the subject of rape and of sort of medical coercion. So joining me now via Skype is Sally from Manchester, who volunteers with the Abortion Support Network, who provide financial assistance and accommodation to people seeking a termination who are travelling from Northern Ireland and from the Republic of Ireland. Hi Sally, thanks for joining us.
Hi Sean, pleasure to join you.
So the first thing I wanted to ask is, how does sort of the law and the general situation in Ireland differ from the UK with respect to abortion?
Well, in the UK, people in need of a termination are able to get one with the support of two doctors. In Northern Ireland, the only time that anybody can consider applying for an abortion is if there's a grave health risk to the mother, and in reality this is rarely, if ever, applied. In the rest of Ireland, the 1861 Offences Against the Person Act still applies, which is quite ludicrous really. It's a Victorian Act making it illegal to carry out an abortion or termination, and the result of that would be life imprisonment. So you can't get a termination under any circumstances in reality in the South, although they will say that if there's a grave health risk to the mother, then they would do that. But in fact, in reality, it doesn't happen because the doctors don't really know, it's never been tried, what constitutes a grave health risk.
So they effectively just haven't defined what kind of risk it needs to be then?
No, and the 8th Amendment of the Irish Constitution puts the life of the mother and the life of the unborn fetus as equal. So the mother has very little standing, or the potential mother, the person who's pregnant, has little standing, in fact.
It's obviously, it's much more restrictive situation than it is in the UK. Why do you think that is? I mean, obviously a lot of people sort of point to the Catholic Church as an influence, but I mean, do you think that there's other things at play there?
No, I think they'd be absolutely right in saying that the Catholic Church has a huge influence on what's happened in Ireland with regards to getting the termination. The Catholic Church has always been anti-women in controlling women's lives, and that has pervaded every level of society in Ireland. We know about the laundries where women were locked up as slaves for most of their lives if they got pregnant, or if they were just a little bit different from other people. So that is a major factor, but this is not the days of the laundries. This is the days of 2015, and I think another major factor is that doctors are very loath to do things which step outside the norm. They're extremely well paid, and they would have a hell of a lot to lose in terms of income and status if they were to perform an abortion, and if they were to stand with their patients and not with the state. I mean, they would be liable to losing their income, and they would be liable to, if the state decided to take it to the full extent of the law, to life imprisonment. I mean, that is a big deal. There are doctors in Ireland who oppose the legislation. They are an organisation called Doctors for Choice, and they are the exception rather than the rule. But that is another factor, I think. I think that the role of women in Ireland, in certainly rural areas, is still very, very much a traditional role. It's not for everybody. I'm not going to put everybody in the same box, but it makes it very difficult. And another thing, the fourth thing, is the stigma which is associated with termination. It's very hard if you don't live in Ireland to understand this, and when I first found out personally about the situation, the abortion situation in Ireland, I was cheerfully, freely talking about it in pubs with feminists, and even they were anxious. People just didn't talk about abortion. It's changing. It is changing. I mean, that is a good thing. But the stigma attached to abortion in Ireland is huge, is massive. People don't talk about it. And those, I think, are major factors.
So, talked a little bit before about the abortion support network. I suppose what I wanted to ask is, what exactly is the abortion support network? I mean, what's your involvement as a volunteer?
Well, the Abortion Support Network was founded in 2009 by Mara Clark, who's an American woman who came over to the UK, having been involved in helping people in America get money together for abortions there. And when she came over to the UK, she was like, oh, well, okay, I used to do this stuff in the States, what can I do here? And she started out doing some campaigning work and thought, no, I'm not a campaigner, I'm a doer. And she set up the ASN, the Abortion Support Network. And the Abortion Support Network works by, on one hand, fundraising as hard and fast as it can to provide money for people to travel, provide money for them to pay for terminations, and also to provide accommodation for people who need to stay overnight. The Abortion Support Network also provides information if it is unable to help because somebody is not able to leave the country due to not having the paperwork. They can signpost them to organisations like Women on the Web, who will arrange for pills to be sent, for example. I joined volunteering because I'm a doer as well, my role is twofold. Mainly, I'm a volunteer host. So when people come over for termination, usually they have to stay one night in the UK, and we would pick them up from the clinic after they've had their procedure and bring them back to the house and feed them and just generally give them a bit of TLC, and then take them to the airport the following morning so that they're able to get home, or take them to the railway station or what have you. Sometimes people stay a bit longer. We had a woman from, she was a non-Irish resident living in Dublin, and who already had 3 children, who she loved and wanted, and was pregnant and wanted this child, but had a fatal fetal abnormality. She came over with her husband and was told by the clinic that they couldn't do the termination for whatever reason, I don't know, and had to go back to Ireland. They'd used up enough money and goodwill in that first trip over in terms of childcare for only her to be able to travel on her own the following week when she had to go to the hospital. And she came and stayed with us for 3 days, and it was pretty awful. It was pretty difficult. It was terribly difficult for her. I have to say we find it quite difficult because it was very, very sad. She wanted this child, and she was very stoical, but obviously upset.
I should imagine, with what you were saying before about the stigma as well, that must be. I mean, to have to do that already, and then on top of that, to then sort of have to travel to do that, and to be away from your own sort of support network at home, and maybe not even to be able to tell like your friends and your family.
Most people, most of the women that we've had here have either told nobody at all or have told one person. So if you think about it, you're pregnant, you're getting on a plane. One woman arrived not that long ago with her child's school bag. and her stuff in her child's school bag so that nobody would know that she was actually going anywhere. These are women who tell nobody, and then they go back and they tell nobody. I mean, I have met people who have met women who for many, many years have told nobody and suffer psychologically because they've got no one they can talk to. And people they're suicidal with the situation that they're in. Rape is a common enough reason to be pregnant. I mean, the ASN within over a 4-year period had 49 people who were pregnant from rape, and that's 49 is a significant number. 29 people were women with fatal fetal abnormalities, and they've been to a doctor. The doctor said, "I'm terribly sorry, your child will not survive. You have to consider what you want to do, whether you want to carry this to term or whether you want to have a termination." And they've gone away and they've thought about it and they've agonised about it, and then they've gone back and said, "No, we want to have a termination." And then they're told, "You'll have to go to the UK." I mean, that is just the pits. Yeah. That is just disgusting. And it's enough, the time has come for Irish people and people who are living there to be able to have control over their own bodies. I know strong feminists who become pregnant and become very scared because they don't have control over their own bodies anymore.
So who does the ASN support?
Some people think that the clients of the ASN are going to be young girls who've had too much to drink on a Saturday night and gone out and got pregnant, but it isn't like that at all. The ASN doesn't ask gender, for example, when it's supporting clients, and someone's gender doesn't influence their grant eligibility. Young women do use the ASN, and so do older people too. So the range is very wide.
So, I mean, do you think that this is maybe an issue that affects some people more than others, or is it fairly sort of even through society?
No, it's a good question. I think that the people who are worst affected are, or maybe it's better to look at it the other way. The people who can cope with it best are those who are middle class, who are employed, who have a credit card, who have a supportive family, who can get time off work fairly easily. Those people, yes, it's grim, but it's not as grim by any manner of means. They can book a flight with their credit card, they can get the time off work, they've got somebody who can mind their children and so on. I mean, that makes life a lot easier. What becomes much more difficult is when you're trying to scrape the money together, and that is one of the tales that ASN tells very well and is very shocking. People will contact them saying that they may be 14 weeks pregnant and they've not got any money, and then the abortion support network volunteer on the phone will have to say, "Well, have you got anything that you can sell?" And they may reply, "Well, I can sell a car," or "I can sell my fridge," or something like that. And I know that the abortion support network volunteers occasionally have to say, "Have you looked under the sofa for any loose change?" to see whether they can scrape money together that way, because the abortion support network is not on a bottomless pit of funds by any manner of means. So working class families, working class pregnant people, those are the ones who are worst affected. And yet again, another layer of horror on top of that is people who are perhaps asylum seekers, migrants, and so on, who don't have the paperwork that they need to travel to the UK. So they haven't got any money, they have got very little support network, and they don't have paperwork. And those people are the ones who really, really, really struggle.
Okay. What do you think the prospects are for change in the near future?
When Savita Halappanavar died in 2012, I think it was, she was the dentist in Galway who was suffering a miscarriage, and they refused to do a termination, and she died of septicemia. When that happened, I thought, the Irish state is going to be so embarrassed internationally, she was Indian, that they will do something about it, that they will get their acts together. You know, the Times of India was writing editorials lambasting the Irish state, and I thought, okay, this is it. This will tip the balance, and they'll get their acts together, and they didn't. More recently, a young woman entered Ireland who had been raped in her country of origin, aged, I believe, 16, very young, and asked for termination. She was suicidal, and the state said no. She went on hunger strike. They basically imprisoned her in a mental hospital until she was 24, 25 weeks pregnant, when they forced a caesarean section on her. I mean, this is a state. They forced a caesarean section on her, and the child was taken away. I don't know what happened after that. And when that all came out, I thought, okay, this is going to have to be the tipping point. I don't know. This is about this Friday to try and legalise gay marriage in Ireland, and I think that may be indicative, depending on how that goes, because the two kind of go together, but not necessarily. I really don't know. I mean, I'd like to think that the sisterly solidarity that I'm able to offer to people coming from Ireland will no longer be needed soon, but I'm not sure that's the case.
So, how can people get involved? I mean, what can people do to sort of support the ASN, or to support the sort of pro-choice cause?
Well, they're kind of different questions. Supporting the ASN, there are two ways. The ASN is looking for more women to host in Liverpool. So if you're in Liverpool and you have time and somewhere for somebody to sleep, and you feel like you could lend your time to people who need it coming over, then email volunteer@abortionsupport.org.uk, and Mara will be back to you and would come up and meet you and see whether you'll be suitable, and I'm sure that she would do her best to get as many volunteers as possible. If you don't have the time or the space, but you do have some money, it doesn't have to be a lot. If you have a little bit of money, if you have a lot of money, whatever, it costs a lot. A termination left too long costs £2,000 per person. And like I said earlier, people are scraping money out of the bottoms of their sofas, are feeding their families on beans on toast for 3 weeks at a time to get the money together. So any money that you've got spare, maybe the price of a pint, the price of a kebab, the price of a packet of cigs, if you've got that money spare, then donate to the ASN, and that would make a big difference. And if you can do that, it's abortionsupport.org.uk/donate.
Okay. And I'll put that email address and that link in the show notes, so they'll be there for anyone listening who wants to follow those. Thanks for talking to us, Sally.
You're very welcome, Sean, and I hope that people who listen to this will be able to either help by hosting or help by funding, and tell other people about it. People in the UK don't know how bad it is for people in Ireland.
So, I'd like to bring up cuts, in particular cuts to mental health. One of the things when the coalition was actually in, they actually said they'd make mental health a priority, and instead of that they've cut it quite significantly.
You do shock me.
Yeah. Well, it's more surprising from the Liberal Democrats rather than the Conservatives, but being as mental health will affect 1 in 4 of us over the course of a year, according to the Mental Health Foundation. So it's quite a significant portion of people that will be affected by mental health. They made significant cuts to children's mental health, up to 6% since 2010. That combined with other cuts to mental health, it kind of adds up to about 8%, which works out as a cut of 598 million. Yeah. When you consider that about 75 of people with mental health problems don't seek help at all and are making huge cuts like this. Just find it absolutely appalling. If anything, it's an area that needs more spending, not less. It's been estimated, in order to sort of repair the damage that's just been done, they'd need to spend an extra $1 billion to reverse some of the damages that's been done with these cuts. And I've got a bit of an anecdote here, but a friend of mine who had PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, was told, I mean this is before the coalition as well, that she would have to wait up to 24 weeks to be seen by a therapist, and this was with the NHS. And this was a person that was not eating properly, not sleeping properly, and wasn't able to leave their own home. Yeah, it's pretty surprising how badly mental health was treated even before the coalition was even in. So I would like to say that I actually have mental health issues myself, and part of the reason why I wanted to bring this up is to try and say that it is stigmatised. And I think with more people coming out and saying that, like, you know, I've got an issue, if they're in a position to do so, then it'll actually help people fight the cuts which are happening to this sort of situation. Quick question for you. What do you think the biggest mental health issue in the UK is?
Well, if I was going to guess, I'd probably say it would either be depression or anxiety.
It is actually anxiety in the UK. As I say, there's quite a huge portion of people that don't seek any sort of medical help about it, and as I say, it cuts up to 8%. I think it's pretty appalling what the coalition have done, considering the idea was that they were going to try and prioritise it and, I don't know, maybe help make it less of a stigma. So it's one of the things that I wanted to bring up, especially as it's something that affects me and quite a few of my friends, more so now, I think, are actually coming out with it to me. I mean, privately, but...
Well, I mean, I know that, I mean, in terms of sort of cuts to services locally, I was at a meeting for Liverpool against the cuts the other day, and one of the things that was brought up is that, Liverpool Council, Labour-controlled council, under Joe Anderson, is talking about only providing enough funding to care providers to pay care workers minimum wage. And that's going to be quite a big sort of cut in pay. A lot of people are going to be sort of quite badly affected by that, and I think that kind of thing can affect the quality of the service as well.
It's not just that. I mean, you're talking about a very difficult job to do with unsociable hours and whatever else that's involved. To pay them minimum wage, I think, is pretty horrible, considering minimum wage hasn't gone up for the last 3 years. I think it went up briefly. This year, I think
it's gone up in line with inflation.
But before then, I think it was about 3 years before it went up, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
we'll have to check that.
Yeah, not too sure about that. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, cuts to the services themselves from the point of view of service users. I mean, and I've seen this myself because a year ago I was working as a support worker myself, and the funding cuts. I mean, on top of it, being quite bad for people who are working in care. It's much worse for the people who actually depend on that care, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, especially when you have people like the people that I used to work with who all had like quite severe learning disabilities, and without wanting to go into too much detail, just even to get out of the house, they required one-to-one support.
Yeah.
And we were just seeing like the support hours that they were allocated cut back again and again and again, to the point where it became more and more difficult to, as it went on from, sort of around 2010, 2011, when we started to see a lot of these cuts of funding coming in, it just became more and more difficult to sort of organise activities, support them to like just go for a walk around the park or go to the shops. Sometimes we just didn't have the staff on duty to do something like that.
Or the funding to take them somewhere, perhaps.
Yeah, so...
I think one of the harder things about this is that the biggest cut to it all is on the children's mental health, and that puts even a greater pressure on like parents which have to deal with this, and they're under enough pressure. If you've got a child with mental health issues, you do need that space to sort of A, sleep, and B, do something to try and relax yourself.
Yeah, I know funding for respite has gone right down
Yeah.
over the last few years.
Yeah,
and
well,
they say it's a lifeline for a lot of people, because if you're effectively having to be a full-time carer for a family member, I mean obviously it's something that you want to do for somebody that you love, but it's hard work.
oh yeah, it's very difficult.
And it's extremely tiring, and it can put a lot of strain on relationships within the family
Yeah,
when people sort of having to depend on family. And that sort of respite care can make all the difference, I think,
yeah,
in just sort of making it possible for for people to maybe to get a bit of a break from having this sort of 24/7 caring responsibility.
Well, I can't see this issue going away anytime soon. As I say, just to even begin to reverse what the coalition's done, and say they need to spend an extra $1 billion on the issue, even to just begin to reverse that. And as I said, I reiterate, there's 75% of people that don't go and seek help anyway, and so they're only dealing with a fraction, and that fraction's being cut back upon. It's just the whole thing makes me a bit sick.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, in terms of like cuts and the sort of the further cuts that I think we know are coming in pretty much all areas of public services.
I'm glad to think.
It is. I mean, I think the next few years are going to be a battle, really. I mean, as if the last 5 years weren't already. Yeah, in terms of like local to us, I mean, anybody listening to this in sort of the Merseyside area, there is going to be an anti-cuts protest, and that's going to be sort of like a static rally on Castle Street. That's the 27th of May at 6 p.m. on Castle Street. There's going to be an anti-cuts protest. You can look it up on Facebook. I think the event title is #Protest Merseyside. You can look up Liverpool Against the Cuts as well. But I mean, I'd urge anyone who's worried about these cuts and who's going to be affected by them, or is just angry about what's being done to us as a class, by the state and by the sort of rich, to get involved, because we're going to need to fight back.
Totally. Yeah, please come along.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the most common things that comes up when people are talking about sexuality is whether sexuality is innate. This thing of born this way, and the sort of the counter thing that you get from, to be honest, a lot of homophobes. People choose to be gay, and which is, who fucking cares?
Can I just add that I've seen a comedian point out, if being gay is a choice, then why don't you be gay for a year? So the homophobes, and I think just like, yep, that about sums it up.
Well, yeah. But I mean, I suppose what I wanted to talk about was what do we actually mean? We say that somebody was born this way. When we say that people are born gay or straight or bisexual, or the idea that anybody is born with any particular sexuality. I mean, people rarely say so, but a lot of the time, what people kind of seem to be implying, well, what they often mean is that a person's sexual orientation is determined by their genetics or by sort of other organic factors, that take place before birth, your in utero factors, sort of hormone levels in the womb and things like that. And at its most sort of simplistic, you get this idea that there's a gay gene, that sort of heterosexuality is sort of in some sense a default setting, and that this can sort of be altered by the presence of this singular gay gene. But that's more of an idea thing in popular culture than in science. I find it interesting that we find this whole idea that it's purely genetic or purely organic plausible when it comes to gender. That what we find attractive could be reduced entirely to something inborn and innate. But not when it comes to the rest of the whole sort of weird and wonderful spectrum of human sexuality. And I've never heard of the search for the non-fetish gene, or the somewhat disturbing fixation on cartoon ponies gene.
Yeah.
But I mean, that aside, sexuality is innate from birth is a testable claim.
Yeah.
So I mean, what does the data say? One early study looked at 56 pairs of brothers, recruited mostly through gay publications. It was done in 1991. That was called A Genetic Study of Male Sexual Orientation. It's in the Archives of General Psychiatry, as J. Michael Bailey and Richard C. Pillard. And what that found was that amongst monozygotic identical twin brothers, they shared the same sexuality 52% of the time. Amongst dizygotic, which is non-identical fraternal twin brothers, you see 22% concordance. Amongst pairs of adopted brothers, which is just sort of there as a control, you see 11% concordance. I think there are criticisms you can make of that study.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a small sample size, 56 pairs of brothers.
Yeah.
I mean, it only looks at men, and I mean it's based on respondents to ads in gay publications, so you've got maybe some sample bias in there. I mean, it's an interesting starting point, because what it shows is that, I mean, there's clearly a strong genetic component going on there.
Yeah.
I mean, because you've got 52% concordance with identical twins compared to 22% with non-identical twins, so clearly genes are a factor there. But it's also clear that genes and in utero conditions can't be the full story, because I mean, even with your identical twins, they share a genome, they share the same in utero conditions. In this study, they're differing in their sexual identity 48% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was a more recent and I think probably higher quality study, which was Genetic and Environmental Effects on Same-Sex Sexual Behaviour, a population study of twins in Sweden. You can tell it's higher quality because the title's much longer and more specific.
Yeah, scientists aren't known for their titles.
Yeah. What was the original title of Origin on the Species? It was like
on the diversity of natural species to change over the course of time, or something.
Yeah, it was something like
something ridiculous.
A consideration of a study on the. It was something ridiculous.
Yeah.
Which it's rare that I say this, but it's lucky that Darwin had an editor. I don't think that would have gone so well.
Wallace's wasn't much better. I think his was about a page long.
Yeah. Okay, so this study this was published in the Archives of Sexual Behaviour. Nicholas Langstrom, Kwasi Raman, Eva Karlstrom, and Paul Lichtenstein. And I do apologise if I've butchered any of those names. Now, this study looked at 2,320 monozygotic pairs of twins and 1,506 dizygotic same-sex pairs of twins. And what the study found, using sort of regression analysis, was that in men, the lifetime likelihood of having at least one same-sex partner was 39% explicable by genetic factors. And this was lower in women, 18 to 19%. But I mean, obviously, again, it's a factor. So I mean, what the data, I think, here is telling us is that there's a biological factor in sexuality, sort of undeniably, but sexuality is not solely determined by biology.
I think, though, like within our own culture, it's more acceptable for women to be gay than men, I think. There does seem to be a sort of unfair bias, I think, when it comes to our culture, when it comes to that.
I'm not so sure that it's that exactly. I think that there's more of an expectation, perhaps, that self-identifying heterosexual women may at some point have a same-sex partner as like a one-off thing, and that's
like experimentation.
There's maybe I think more of a that's seen as less. I mean, I think amongst heterosexual men, you get this kind of thing of this almost fear of being perceived as being gay. But on the other hand, I think that on the other hand, a lot of in gay women, lesbians, I think, come in for an awful lot of hostility and an awful lot of very specific hostility.
I've come across more homophobic people which are sort of okay with the lesbian thing, but not, well, obviously still homophobic towards men. Otherwise, obviously there wouldn't be a homophobe. But I come across that a lot.
I mean, I think a lot of the time that kind of thing can be quite surface level, and it comes into this kind of laddie way lesbians bullshit, which I don't think necessarily translates into behaving like a decent human being to actually existing gay and bisexual women, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But I mean, one of the factors are there that we can talk about here? I mean, one of the most sort of politically contentious is this idea of choice. So this idea that people actively and consciously choose their sexual orientation. I mean, this is bollocks.
Yeah.
I mean, we choose. Yeah, we choose our sexual behaviour, and we might choose how we identify and how we present. We don't choose our sexual proclivities. I mean, I could no more decide to alter who and what I find attractive than I could decide to find Michael Gove's face bearable. I mean, what else is there? I think there's social factors. I mean, this is often mistaken for choice, but it's not exactly the same thing. I mean, we're talking about sort of the influences throughout our lives that shape the way we see the world and the way we see ourselves and the way that we think. What have we experienced? How do we see ourselves? How do we see others? What do we think is expected of us? And I think that could form maybe a big part of the explanation for why even sort of identical twins can present completely different sexual identities and behaviours.
Mm.
I mean, in some ways the big question is, and I sort of touched on this right at the beginning, does it even matter? From the point of view of sort of your LGBTQ rights, it doesn't matter. People should be free to engage in whatever consensual sexual activity with other adults that they see fit.
I'm thinking more religiously right-wing might be thinking cure with that sort of information, which I find a bit worrying.
Yeah, I mean...
I'm by no means right-wing religious. I can't stand the idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where a lot of this stuff gets lost in the politics of it. And I mean, this is why, in a way, I wanted to talk about this, is partly because fundamentally it matters what is true, not what is convenient. And if it were true that sexuality was straightforwardly innate or consciously chosen, then that's what I would want to believe, because I want to be right. I mean, I don't think either of those things are true. I think that the evidence is that you've got kind of a complex sort of combination of genetics and in utero and social stuff going on. I mean, the one thing that doesn't really make a lot of sense is this idea of choice, and it's the thing that even if it were possible to change somebody's sexuality, why? I think is the thing.
Yeah.
And I think we can't be scared out of talking about the facts, because right wingers or bigots might try to twist the facts because they do that for a living. They will always find an excuse to do that, and if the facts aren't there for them to twist, they'll make their own facts up and then twist them.
Well, they have their own information bias on stuff like that. They will deliberately ignore one bit of scientific data and go for another bit that fits their argument.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, I think what I'm saying is that we need to be basing our arguments on what's true and not on what's convenient.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up CERN. I personally believe that they should have been scooped on the Higgs boson years and years ago. The LHC is the most powerful particle accelerator on the planet currently, and it's having an upgrade. It's actually getting more powerful soon due to an accident it had where it actually damaged itself, and it was still able to find the Higgs boson even when it was damaged, so it wasn't running at full capacity when it found this. Back in 1993, America was halfway through building one of their own, which was more powerful than CERN even before it broke. And they'd already spent about $1 billion already just digging a hole for it, essentially. And then, unfortunately, they had a review in the Senate and dragged a scientist up and said, "Will this help us find God?" The scientist just, "No, it'll help us find the Higgs boson."
I don't know who it was that used the words God particle first.
I think that's why.
I kind of feel like they should be taken out and shot because.
But if it helps the stupid politicians to agree to help find important things like that, it helps them understand how important these things are, then by all means.
Yeah, why stop there? Call it the money particle.
Well, why not? Well, if the scientific ignorance allows them to be fooled that easily, then by all means. It's the Senate's fault for not looking in these things. They actually spent another $1 billion on filling it back up again. I find utterly ridiculous. There is a quote which I'm rather fond of. I don't think it was for this particular project, but it was some of a scientific thing that was being defended in the Senate. One scientist was asked, "Will this help defend America?" He went, "No, it won't help us defend America. It will make America worth defending," which I love as a quote. It about sums it up. Anyway, I digress slightly. As I say, I think due to the size of the one that the Americans were going to build in '93, they could have quite easily found the Higgs boson, and instead they were spending quite a significant amount, maybe not for their government, but a significant amount nonetheless, on basically building a hole and refilling it back up. And the real kicker is like CERN managed to find the Higgs boson with half the amount of power it was supposed to have, and the Americans are one of the countries which help fund it. There's something like 21 member states, most of which are EU countries, and the likes of Canada, Japan and whatnot. But America is one of the ones that actually help fund it, so they really shot themselves in the foot, I think.
I mean, I get the impression with the US when it comes to science funding that it's politically driven in a way that maybe it isn't so much in the UK. I mean, like directly, as in politicians seem to have like direct decision-making power over funding sort of research projects, which is it seems fundamentally bizarre to me, because they're politicians. They don't have a fucking clue what they're talking about. They'll sit up, they're like a particle physicist in the middle of a room and say, are you going to find Jesus for us? Yeah.
Just say yes. Of course. That's it. Yeah.
It's behind the curtains. Give me the money.
Yeah. When it comes to NASA and the funding for them, I like the fact that both Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson both pointed out that it's less than 1 cent out of every tax dollar. Half of 1 cent goes to NASA. And in fact, Neil deGrasse Tyson made another point that they'd actually spent more on the bank bailout than the entire running budget of all of NASA's exploration. So I'm kind of getting a bit fed up of America thinking that it's somehow poor. It's far from it. And the James Webb Telescope, I don't know if you know much about that one.
Can't say so, do no.
It's, as far as I understand, it's an infrared version of Hubble. It's a much more powerful telescope, but it's searching in the infrared spectrum. And don't get me wrong, that went over budget by a few billion, but again, it's a drop in the pond for American taxpayers. But they really had to fight tooth and nail to get that up, and again, it's almost like the American accelerator. They were very nearly going to cancel it, and it was mostly built. I can't remember the exact details, but I think it was like 18 billion to build, and it went over by about 3 billion, I think. I'm going to have to look that one up. But again, it's just like, why spend so much and then cancel?
I think what you have to bear in mind with a lot of funding in the US is they're not even putting the funding in to maintain their sort of critical infrastructure. Like this is a big problem in America now, is that they're having real problems with things like roads and overpasses and bridges that haven't been properly maintained in years, and are now parts of them are literally crumbling in a way that is extremely dangerous. And there's still like an argument about whether there should be more funding put towards them, which is just
ludicrous.
Baffling. Yeah. I mean, what?
As I say, like within the blink of an eye, they can bail out a huge amount of banks, and which costs more than the whole of NASA's ever had spent on it. And I don't hear anyone complaining, saying, "Oh, that money could have been spent on roads or hospitals." But for some reason, science gets attacked on that front far too often.
I mean, I have heard people making those complaints. I've made those complaints. So
yeah,
but yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. I've heard Brian Cox have to defend himself against Jeremy Paxman about scientists that are working in CERN, and you can find a video on YouTube, I'm sure, and he just keeps bringing up the fact that these scientists aren't just working at CERN; they are actually working in cancer research as well. And they have to also go where the money is as well. They have to make a living for themselves.
Yeah. Well, didn't CERN like the research centre play a big role in the developments of the internet as we know it?
CERN did, yeah.
Yeah.
CERN pretty much invented the internet, alright.
Yeah.
There were like other versions, other predecessors to the internet by the American military, but as we know it today, it was pretty much CERN. So, yeah, without them we wouldn't have this.
Yeah. So I mean,
Sorry, CERN.
they're not perfect then.
So I've written a segment called "Kangaroo Fart Save the World." So this is more to do with methane production and how we can essentially lower it. And I was under the mistaken impression that kangaroos didn't produce much in methane when it comes to them farting. It turns out this isn't true. So a lot of us eat an awful lot of meat in terms of the West. We also eat way too much for the planet to actually cope with. A lot of resources go on feeding like animals and whatnot. And when you considered like there is about 1.5 billion cattle on the planet, all producing an awful lot of methane, which it's more of a damaging greenhouse gas than the likes of CO2, for example. So the idea is that scientists were looking at like other animals which did produce less methane in order to see if they could culture the bacteria from one gut of an animal into another, for example. And one of the ones that they were interested in was the kangaroo. For some reason, somebody got the idea that they didn't produce any, whereas the likes of Western sort of black and white cattle, they can produce something like 120 kilograms of methane per year, which is a fair old amount. It's one of the reasons why I've actually stopped eating beef. Yeah, I can't justify that one to myself anymore. Sheep only produce something like 8 kilograms per year, so it's actually significantly lower. Question for you is, how much do you reckon a human being that isn't, using machinery just by themselves, for example, how much methane do you think a human being would produce?
And how much was it for a cow?
A cow, which is like one of the worst offenders for producing methane, is 120 kilograms per year.
I'm going to say just like the human gut we're talking about here in terms of what people eat. I'm going to say something in the region of 25, 30.
Not even close. It's actually 0.12 kilograms.
Hell.
Yeah, we're actually quite a good one in all things considered.
I was right.
Yeah. Well, I had no idea of any of this myself until I looked into it. Which brings me on to, as I say, the kangaroos, which they actually thought that they didn't produce any methane, but under the right experimental conditions and guessing some sort of box with not much ventilation, they actually did find out that they were in fact farting methane. It turns out that cows, they do fart, but they don't release much methane that way. They actually burp most of their methane up. And so when they were looking at the kangaroos and their burping, they weren't producing any, essentially. So when the experiment was done properly, they were finding that these things were actually producing quite a bit of methane.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna stop you there because I love the fact that the way they decided to test this was to basically build a giant kangaroo Dutch oven.
Yeah.
just trap the poor animal in a box with its own farts.
Well, it gets a lot worse than that, because there was a couple of years ago there was a barn in Germany that actually blew up because there was too much of a methane build-up from cows.
Fucking hell.
You can look this one up. It's not the first time it's happened, but the last time it happened was a couple of years ago somewhere in Germany. So yeah, kangaroos aren't going to save us in any way, shape or form. But an interesting thing I did learn is that because of these barns which have been blown up, leaving cows with burn marks all over them, they've figured out a way of capturing it and using it for cooking gas. Now, sounds a bit gross, but methane is actually odourless and is something we actually use every day anyway in our cooking. There's a bit of a catch to it. I mean, burning it does produce CO2, which is not as bad of a greenhouse gas, but I can't think of a better way of getting rid of it, to be honest. I mean, it's using it as a vital resource.
I mean, I think with that, the issue possibly with the methane carbon dioxide thing, and I'm not completely 100% on this, is that I mean, methane I think does sort of produce more warming when it's in the atmosphere, which is why it's considered a worse greenhouse gas. But one of the issues, as I understood it, is that CO2 actually hangs around in the atmosphere for longer. It doesn't cycle as quickly.
Yeah,
And that then means that once it's in the atmosphere, it's much it's much harder for us then when we're if we can manage to sort of cut down our output to get back to like sort of a more balanced situation.
yeah.
So I mean, I do wonder whether that's necessarily a great
It's
solution.
not. It's not the perfect solution, as I say. I've chosen to stop eating beef myself, but it's an interesting take on it. You know, they're actually using something to burn. I mean, how hard do you think the methane is that's coming into your house?
I really don't know, and I have a feeling like that we're going to have a repeat of the last time, and I'm going to say like 50%, and you're going to be like, no, it's 1 in a million.
I am being mean with these questions, but I'm sure you'll get your own back. It's around 80%. So we are burning an awful lot of natural gas anyway. So I'll say I'm okay with the idea of using cow gas to heat our homes with.
Yeah, and I suppose it's got to be better than using sort of pockets of natural gas that are sort of underground, which is then just sort of bringing more carbon into the cycle.
Well, yeah. So the gas which is actually we're using, as I said before, is completely odorless. They actually put the smell into it so you don't end up blowing yourself up in your homes. So
yeah. I'm glad that we were able to sort of discuss kangaroo farts on this show.
Oh yeah, it's essential.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that we talked about while we were recording the first show, and then cut it out because we weren't too sure of our facts.
Well, I was completely wrong.
Yeah, I was kind of dancing around the you being completely wrong part of politeness, but yeah, you were.
Thanks. Hey, I'm a big boy, I can admit it. I've been Mark, and
I've been Sean.
thanks for tuning in.